these fantastic clinics. So that is the recording started, and it's my pleasure today to welcome you all to this clinic, which is Empowering Changemakers, Unleashing the Changemakers Toolkit. I'm particularly proud of this clinic because it involves two of my colleagues from Wikimedia UK who are joining us as part of Let's Connect, and I will introduce you to them in due course. Just to introduce you to a little bit about Let's Connect culture. Let's Connect is a peer learning program that is operated as a joint community foundation initiative. We are here today to have a good time. We're here because we want to make people feel comfortable and confident, and we believe that everyone has something to learn from anyone, no matter the experience. And having had a sneak preview of what we're going to be doing today, I think we're all going to learn quite a lot from today's session. Again, if you're looking for interpretation, you can do so at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we will have interpretation in Arabic and French. There will also be things happening in the chat. You will see links being shared and information in a variety of languages. We have members of the team here, Chinu, Cassie, Bukola, and Gorana, to support you throughout the session today. We're here today to learn about what changemaking is and how this relates to your role as a Wikimedian, how campaigning and advocacy can be used by the Wikimedian movement, and how to communicate for change and to deliver effective, impactful messages. Our session will run in the following way. We will have my short introduction here, an introduction by our speakers, a group activity and sharing, a short break, a second activity and sharing, and some time for reflection. We'll then have a small amount of time for feedback and to close the session out together. We have a notes document in the Etherpad. One of my colleagues will drop that link into the chat for you. This is a space where you can ask questions and we will share resources both during and after the clinic. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to my wonderful colleagues from Wikimedia UK. We have Daria Cybulska and Dr. Richard Nevell, both of whom are part of the programmes team at Wikimedia UK, and both of whom have worked on the development of the Changemakers Toolkit. I'm really excited for them to share with you what it is they've created and how we can use it to our best advantage as Wikimedians. So I'm going to pass over to Richard now. I will stop my screen share and allow you to take it away.
So thank you very much. I'll be passing over to Daria to set the scene for this toolkit.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Yeah, I'll be opening the session. In fact, we will start with introducing ourselves. So I'll throw the mic back at you in a second, Richard. But for now, welcome to the session from my perspective. The QR code you just saw was the link to our full toolkit, which I'm sure we'll keep on sharing in the chat, but also at the end, if you like, you can follow the link right now, but this is essentially the full toolkit there. Today is an opportunity for you to engage a little bit deeper with it, hear some context, but that link will come again, don't worry. So moving on to the actual intros. I am Daria Cybulska. I'm the Director of Programs at Wikimedia UK, and I helped create this project. And with me is Richard, who I'll pass on to just to say hello.
There we are. Getting out of the slide so I can unmute. So I also work for Wikimedia UK as a program manager. My role with this toolkit has been to start adapting it to Wikimedia and its particular needs. And it was a really interesting exercise to think about how change making applies to stuff that I've been doing as well. It's not necessarily something I'd thought about previously.
Excellent. So just to move on quickly, we've already heard the sort of plan of the session, but in terms of the actual content, we will explain what the toolkit is, a little bit about how it came about, and you'll hear what's included in it. And like you heard, we will actually engage with it, use some of the tools in the toolkit, 2 specific ones that we think are particularly useful out of the sort of 9 that are offered, the social change and spectrum of allies. And there will be time at the end to share more reflections. We've already had the session objectives in the next slide. I just wanted to share something from, yeah, next slide, sorry, Richard. So those are the learning objectives. But and one of the key things that prompted us to create this project and talk about change making within the Wikimedia movement is a reflection that I believe most, if not all of us as Wikimedians are change makers, are sort of activists and advocates in some sort of a way. All of the work that we do, activities as Wikimedians, are actually activist and change making in its approach. And even just the awareness of that and framing our work in the context of change making can be quite empowering and giving access to resources where other people have thought about how change happens and how to be a more efficient, effective change maker. It was really heartwarming and exciting to read people's sign up information when they were registering for this event, because we did ask a question about like what's change making for you, and I already saw that people are thinking about their work a lot of the time in the context of change making, which was great. So there were things like people talking about that it's introducing and implementing policies that bring new ideas or knowledge. It's about changing direction, making a change from how things would happen otherwise. It's a concept for people who desire to see a change in the world, making something happen, working with your community, changing public perception. That's a topic dear to my heart because I believe that changing narratives, changing how things are talked about can be one of the very impactful ways of creating change. And that's often what we do in creating or changing Wikipedia articles. And then one person said that change making is everything, which I particularly liked. So just to move on, you'll see what's the Changemakers Toolkit by engaging with content. We'll show you that in a second. But just on a high level, it's a set of background information and practical exercises. Some of them demonstrated how to actually do them. It's self-led training resources for change making, which just means any sort of shift of how things are right now. We're thinking about it in a very broad way. It links to what we at Wikimedia UK saw as a movement need, in that we do in the movement talk a fair bit about advocacy and public policy, and we have resources around that, but we don't as much have resources that tackle everything else, kind of very general approach to, say, talking to an organization or speaking generally about the benefit of open knowledge or trying to build coalitions or doing something grassroots. All of that is still change making, and we believe that it would be good to give people resources for that. And interestingly, it was created as a collaboration between Wikimedia UK and an organization called Sheila McKechnie Foundation. It's a charity based in the UK, who are a leading change makers and an activist kind of thought leader specialist in the UK. They focus on this concept called civic power, which is all about empowering activists, grassroots charities to implement change on whatever topic that they think is important within social change. What's particularly good about them is that they think about change, making big and small shifts, not just in the context of it being kind of a small change, but broadly within a system, what you need to create coalitions, thinking through making change at different levels. And I think that's something that will really help us when we think about the change making here, as we helped them on their open knowledge journey, which was, I guess, change making in itself, because it was the first time they were releasing something on an open license, because they thought they want to share broader the knowledge that they've developed over years. And like Richard said, we've localized, contextualized their expertise and knowledge onto our context within the Wikimedia movement. It was funded by Wikimedia Foundation, and we think that the use of it is, like I said, kind of broadening our perspective. I think within Wikimedia, we often think about our expertise and copyright and kind of what change we need to happen within our work. It's quite useful to think more generally about the context and kind of the environment, the systems within which we are working, and how the whole thing has to influence each other to create a kind of impactful and a sustained change. So that's what the kind of thinking behind the toolkit is. And with that, I would like to pass to Richard to actually tell you a little bit more about the content of the toolkit, what you can find inside and what you can actually learn.
Thank you very much. So, here's the QR code again. It will appear later on as well, and you'll be able to access these slides afterwards. So if you don't have time to scan this code right now, don't worry, you can do that later. So the Changemakers Toolkit is a free learning resource to help you improve and develop your skills when it comes to outreach and connecting with organizations and bringing about that change that we want to see in society and in organizations. The toolkit is structured into 3 modules. Each of these modules has 3 tools within them. It explains what the tool is, how it can be applied. It has an example to show how it's been used, and then it sets you an activity which you can then do yourself to get some experience with this particular model or approach. What we're looking for here is you to explore the toolkit and see how it can help you. With the exercises, these are things that you can do either on your own or as part of a group. We found that working as part of a group means that you get more out of these exercises because you've got different ideas, different viewpoints, and that can lead to other thoughts as well. So I would suggest that these are good to go through on your own, but when it comes to the exercises, see if you can find some people to work with on it. So these are the 3 modules that have been developed. There's one about an introduction to change making, so introducing the idea of what change making is and how that might be something that we're already doing in some ways. And it introduces a couple of ideas related to that as well. The second module is about looking at your situation and strategizing how you want to go about bringing about change. And the third module is about communication, what kind of messages you might want to use, what kind of groups you connect with, and how you frame your messages. So going into that in just a little bit more detail. So with the introduction to change making, it's looking at how change making takes place, who are the people who can be involved with that, and who you might want to connect with to help your activities and efforts. It looks at potential allies you can work with and how you might spot them for your particular context, and ways which can be effective at connecting with people and making your strategy. With the second module, it helps you look at your situation, identify what challenges you might be facing, and start to plan for those solutions. And it also suggests a couple of planning tools and how you can implement those. And then with the communications module, it talks you through how you decide on your audience. Clear communication is best when it's tailored to a particular group. If you're trying to connect with everyone, it ends up being quite diffused and trying to cover too many bases. And it's working out what effective communication can look like for different situations. So that's cover the ground of what is in the Changemakers Toolkit. Though it's structured as 3 modules, I would say you don't have to follow it one after another. Very much is a case of following where your curiosity leads you. If there's something in there which sounds really interesting, go ahead and explore it. We'll be looking today at something called the social change grid, so I'll be introducing that shortly, and the spectrum of allies. So these are 2 particular tools within the toolkit, and they are from the first and the third module. So you don't necessarily need to go through in an order of 1, 2, 3. You can explore it in whichever way works for you. I think it is worth going through all the content as well, even if there's a topic you think you might be very familiar with, because it helps you think about it in different ways. And that can be very useful for seeing where your knowledge is at that particular point in time. So before I talk about the social change grid, let's have a quick show of hands using the React function on Zoom. Who thinks of themselves as a change maker? So I'll do mine manually. I do now think of myself as a change maker. Before working on the toolkit, I probably wouldn't have said that. But as I learned about the different kinds of activities with working with organizations and persuading people and trying to bring about a particular change, I realized that some of that stuff is already taking place. And I suspect that a lot of you will already be doing stuff which would be considered change making. So let's take a look at the social change grid. This is one of the tools that's detailed in the toolkit. It looks at the different activities that can be undertaken with campaigning. Now, by campaigning, we're talking about a collection of activities trying to bring about a particular objective. So that can be working with a museum to release their content, or it could be trying to convince local politicians to introduce a particular piece of legislation. Or it could be any number of different kinds of collaborations. What this grid does is it helps us look at two different qualities. There's a scale from formal to informal and another from individual to societal. Individual being the kind of activity you can undertake on your own, and societal being ones that take place on a larger scale, so with groups of people or even entire organizations. And so we've found, well, I should say that the organization we partnered with, from their many years of work with campaigns and advocacy and trying to bring about social change, have found that successful campaigns tend to have activities that address all four of these areas. So here's an example of the kind of activities that can fit within this social change grid. We've got 4 of those segments. So there is public in top right. We have institutional, where we're starting to work with organizations. Personal in bottom left, which is things that we can do on our own as individuals. And in the top left, we've got community. We're starting to have grassroots organizations involved in activities. Now, some of these may be activities which are already being used in campaigns. Not all of them will necessarily be transferable to the world of Wikimedia. So, for example, we have in the top right an example of strikes. Now, perhaps that could be applied to Wikimedia, but that's not the easiest one to do. So it's worth looking at some of these examples. Some of them will be relevant, some of them less so. But I think it's a really useful exercise to think about what is and isn't applicable to our situations. So, for example, in the community area where we're looking at grassroots activities, there's stuff like activities with neighborhood WhatsApp groups, tapping into those communication networks to access those groups. There are local groups as well, which might not be on particular platforms, but can be really useful to access. And if we're looking at institutional, in a sense, that might be organizations, but there are other institutions as well, such as, say, legal frameworks. So in this segment, we've got stuff to do with policy development, lobbying, and use of the law. So I think I'm not going to go through every single example there, but there's some really interesting stuff. I'd recommend exploring this in a bit more detail afterwards. So what comes next is an example of how it's been applied. This is an example from the She Said campaign. So that's an initiative trying to get people to contribute quotes to Wikiquotes, especially to address the gender gap. And as we can see here, part of what made it a successful campaign is that it addressed all 4 of these segments. It had media coverage, it had individual activities with people sharing quotes, community organizing going on with editathons, and there was an element of speaking truth to power as well, with these quotes being shared on social media. It was a really effective campaign and has been running again this year. So I think that's a really good example to look at. And it shows just how useful all these segments can be. So now we're moving on to the part where we get interactive. We'll be breaking into groups to work through an example. In fact, so here are the instructions. We're going to be moving into groups, and I would like people in the groups to briefly share a situation where you're currently trying to bring about change. From these examples, I want your group to decide on a topic to collaborate on, to apply to the social change grid. And using the grid, I want you to think about different activities that you could deliver to bring about change with that campaign. I would suggest starting with a community quadrant and then working your way around. But as always, if you want to ping about the grid, that's entirely fine as well. Just see where the activity leads. If you're stuck for an idea of a campaign to work on, there's a suggestion at the bottom. So for example, you could work on the topic of climate change and how you would bring about change related to that. So I think we are now at a stage where we can move into breakout rooms.
Brilliant. Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Daria. So we have 40 people in the room. We're going to divide into 3 breakout rooms. Cassie will facilitate the breaking of the rooms. The first room will be this main room. You won't move into a breakout room, you'll stay here. This is where there will be translation. So if you require French or Portuguese translation, please make yourself known and stay in this room. Maybe if you could raise a hand at this point, we will know not to move you into a different room. The other 2 rooms, one will have Daria, Bukola, and Chinu. The other will be myself and Gorana. We will help lead you through this task. We will also have the text of the task in each room so that you're able to see it and refer back to it. On my clock, it is 31 minutes past the hour. We will be in these breakout rooms until 45 minutes past the hour. Then we will come together for a 10-minute reflection before a 5-minute break. With all that in mind, if I could ask Cassie to open up the breakout rooms. So room 1 will be this main room. Room 2 will be with Daria, Bukola, and Chinu. And the 3rd room will be with myself and Gorana.
Doing that now, and I'm going to pause the recording. Give me 1 second.
No problem.
So this will take a few minutes, y'all, so please be a little patient.
And if anyone wants to stay in the main room for translation, that's totally fine. Just raise your hand and Cassie will know not to move you. Okay, I can see an invite on my screen.
Potentially accessing those other groups with those decision-making abilities. And with a petition, the individual action might be something very personal, but it really becomes effective when you've got a large group of people, that community or the general public, who are supporting that petition, and becomes an expression of this desire for change. Right, okay, so I think I saw a few more people joining the main room. Does that mean the breakout rooms have closed?
They have, we're all back. We've all crashed in. As usual, I forgot that after you click close rooms, you get a 60-second countdown. So I had everyone all prompted to just leave, and then I clicked the button and we had a countdown. So sorry about that. Thank you so much to everyone in the breakout rooms. I'm just going to share my screen for a second.
Cool.
There we go. So in the chat will come a link to an easy retro board. I'm hoping that those of you that have participated in Let's Connect before will be familiar with it. Those who are not, to add a message to the board, you simply click this plus sign and you can add a message. So when I click that, it goes to underneath that question there. So you can delete your cards as well, and you can also add emojis and things like that. We have 3 reflective questions here. You are welcome to respond on the retro board by the link that will be shared in the group chat, or on microphone, or in the Zoom chat. The retro board is nice because we can all see it through this screen share. However, we are very open to hearing what you have to say and having it in the Zoom chat as well. The 3 questions that we ask after this first activity, and this feedback session will go for about 5 to 6 minutes, We ask, are there gaps in your grid? So when you were filling out the 4 quadrants, where were the gaps? Where do you need to think about how to construct action? When you've identified those gaps, how would you address them? And finally, what key groups would you work with? In our group, we spoke about pollution and climate change. We had some gaps in the bottom left quadrant, which I think is, I can't see it because I'm doing my screen share right now, but the bottom left quadrant was where we had gaps. In terms of, there we go, in terms of how to look at the personal and how people might deal with the personal aspects of climate change, there are some questions, some answers that we could put there. And then key groups we would like to work with. People spoke a lot about social media and local government. Those were 2 areas that came up for us. I'm going to give you 5 minutes now to put your answers in the chat or in the retro board. If you would like clarity on this task, please go ahead. And if you would like to respond in your own language rather than English, you are very welcome to do so. So please don't feel that you have to respond in English. I've got 52 minutes past the hour now, so I'm going to pause and let people contribute to the board if they would like to. And as Cassie says, or come off mic, whatever is easiest for you. And I'll refresh to see if anyone has posted anything yet. So are there gaps in your grid? How would you address these gaps? Which key groups would you like to work with?
Is there a volunteer from breakout room 1 that would like to come off mic and explain what they saw and heard from in their group? I meant 2, not Richard's and mine, but from the ones that were not in the main room.
I think we were group 2 with Bukola Generate.
Yes.
I
So
think
if there's
so.
anyone, yeah.
I think we had a very interesting discussion looking at a project to document indigenous Nigerian names on Wikimedia. So in some ways, like a very practical kind of doing project, but then the question was like, okay, this project was to make change, and then we were wondering what change is that really, what stands behind this project, and it was all about increasing representation, increasing awareness of meaning of someone's name, which can be a very meaningful, important thing, and making sure the pronunciation is correct as well. So there was this kind of practical activity, which I guess is somewhere in the kind of community/personal quadrant, which then led us to a discussion of like, okay, so that's where this project is. What else needs to change to make it more impactful, to make it possible? Why is it that the documentation is poor right now? So what needs to change? There was an idea of creating an educational plan that would lead to a campaign to kind of distribute, I guess, this content and maybe bring more contributors. Which I guess expands out from this more personal community onto wider reach. Then also in terms of this or existing documentation, some sort of a need for institutional support, so that the documentation is better. Then there was a suggestion of bringing in language experts. I'm not sure where that would fit in the grid exactly, but there was just a need for additional expertise for support. There was a beautiful idea to engage with influencers, maybe somebody who has a personal story. So it's kind of that example cut across. I think influencers set in this like public quadrant of like informal and societal because they have big reach, but it was mixing it with something really personal on the other side of the grid. So someone's personal and really tangible story used as a way of promoting something publicly. And all of that possibly would bring more awareness of the campaign itself, more interest, meaning more community would get involved with it. So it would be back to engaging with the community. I think I think that's all of the quadrants. Dee was very skilled in kind of looking at how we could take it all across. I'm not sure if I've hit all the, I think I've hit all the quadrants, but not in the order that you explained it, I don't think.
You
So
did
maybe
okay,
the
I
mic.
won't
I'm
know the order.
explaining that better than I did typing it.
Oh, yeah.
That
So
was really interesting. I think as well how some activities can flip between quadrants. So for example, with the personal quadrants, you could have, say, signing a petition. But where that becomes effective is where it then crosses over into the community or societal areas where you're getting lots of support for that. And the petition is demonstrating this particular support for an activity. So it's one of those things where that's just one example, but you can move from one quadrant to another. And that can be really useful as well.
Bukola.
Yeah, thank you so much, Daria and Dee, for like explaining what we did in room 2. Yeah, so just while I was looking at the first part of this activity one that says, are there gaps in your grid? And I saw this comment saying, yes, in the personal/individual quota. I just wanted to maybe ask, I'm curious to maybe hear from you, Richard. If the actual change that you want to make is coming from that individual, can we then say they can actually be a gap in the person/individual quota of the social change grid?
It's a very interesting question. Yes, I suppose there could be. I think what that might suggest is it might be also useful to think about what other individual contributions there could be in there. Because some of change making is about finding the people you can work with. There's one of the modules says that essentially you can do a lot of campaigning and change making on your own, but if we're looking for stuff that's sustainable, so you're not burning out or trying to do too much or bring in other skills, then it's really helpful to involve other people. So where that individual quadrant might be useful is thinking about what other activities you can have for other people to do on their own. So with like Wikipedia editing campaigns, with the She Said example, I mean, that could have been one person's activity as adding lots and lots of quotes themselves, but it was really helpful to broaden that out and involve other people. And the individual activity is still adding those quotes. It's still a really useful thing for people to do. So it's helpful to have those activities clear when you're starting out, as it can be a way of involving people. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Richard.
Yes, it does. Thank you. That was really clear.
That was perfectly timed. And I think it will lead very nicely into the second activity where we're going to talk about people and people power. It's 0 past the hour here. We do have a little break scheduled. If you would like to go and grab a bio break or a cup of water or stretch your legs, we'll be back at 5 minutes past the hour. So you have 4 minutes to take a little break and then we will start again. So I will see you all in 4 minutes' time. Today's clinic.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So now we're moving on to the other tool, which I thought would be useful to explore. It's called the Spectrum of Allies. And the idea is that very often with our campaigns and activities, we think about two main groups: the people who are most enthusiastic about what we do and the people who are most likely to oppose it. And it means that we're missing out on the people in between. So let's take a look at this visualization, just to kind of put it into some kind of visual structure. So on the left, we've got active allies. And that's people who are very enthusiastic about what you do and will actively take part in the things that you organize. So that can be, with a Wikimedia example, it can be taking part in your editing campaigns. It can be, they could be emailing their local politicians about legislation which is relevant to Wikimedia, that kind of thing. One step along is passive allies. Those are people who might share your values. They might see that what you're doing is worthwhile and they support it, but aren't taking active steps to get involved. Then in the center, we've got people who are neutral. That's it's actually quite a broad group potentially, because it could be people who don't know about the particular issue you're trying to bring about change with, or who, I guess, they just don't see how it relates to them. And then getting over to the right-hand side, we've got people who passively oppose a particular activity. Those will be people who maybe, I guess, not just don't share the values, but disagree with whatever something is, but maybe aren't taking active steps to oppose it. And then you've got the active opposition, where people might be doing particular activities to undermine whatever it is. So in a Wikimedia context, it might be people who are actively trying to discredit Wikimedia or who hold hostile views to Wikipedia. Unfortunately, there aren't too many active opponents out there, but they do exist. So the idea behind this is that we're not going to get someone who's an active opponent to flip to being an active ally. What's much easier is to get people who are in one segment to move one along. So we're looking at how we convince people to become active allies from being those passive allies, and from being neutral to being the next step along, to being people who see the value in what we're doing and support it. And if we can convince people who are passive opponents to at least become neutral, that's very worthwhile as well. So it's very much this kind of journey. And given enough time, you might see someone changing from active opposition into being an ally, but that would take some time. So that's the idea behind it. The next step is thinking about how we can put that into practice. So with our next activity, we're again going to go into those breakout rooms. And here's the situation I want you to think about. Imagine that you're involved with a campaign to get Wikipedia taught in schools in your area. You want to involve local communities in that work. Ideally, you want to get their support with that. So I want you to think about what audiences you want to work with. Who are the groups you're going to try and get involved? Where do those people sit on the spectrum of allies? So you might have some really supportive groups. You might have some groups who are neutral to what you do that you want to persuade to become active. And there may be groups who are opponents who you want to at least persuade to be more supportive, or at least neutral. which of these groups are you going to prioritize working with? And what channels and messengers can you use to connect with them? What kind of networks are you able to access? So that's the exercise explained. And now we're going to start setting up the breakout rooms again.
So what are people's thoughts on this? So just for the recording, we're looking at who do you think is most helpful to engage with? And are there groups you aren't engaging with because of where they sit on the spectrum of allies? And if you would like to continue any discussions you were having or conclude them, please do.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to share some of the reflections we had in our room. It was really interesting how we approach the activity. So initially, we're looking at the teachers and students, and also the Ministry of Education being supportive, right? Being within the spectrum that embraces the program. However, just while we were talking loud about how these people should be involved as our audience, then someone in the room pointed out like a very interesting point, and it said something very interesting. It said it's really not about the audience, but the perception of that audience on how they are able to accept Wikipedia as a program in their institution. So we're thinking about, oh, all teachers and students should embrace it. No, all teachers and students cannot embrace it, because of course we have teachers who can be neutral and those who can be passive opposition, and also students that are lazy where you don't even know how to, where you wouldn't even have like that understanding of whether they accept it or not and all that. So those were really great points we had, like great reflections that were coming out from the room. And yeah, I'll just stay off mic and allow any other person share from the room. Thank you.
Thanks, Bukola. I mentioned this in the chat, but education came up in our group as well. And the problem of where we feel people should be on the spectrum, where we expect them to be, and what can happen when they're not where we expect them to be. Margaret's mentioned in the chat, to avoid the red taping from the top like ministry, it is important to engage with teachers and students directly. I think that's a crucial point there. In the retro board, someone has said passive opposition group is tricky. You might not even know they are opposed because they don't say much. I sometimes feel like people don't know they're opposed until they start talking, and then they realize they're opposed. And I think that passive opposition can be difficult. Something that also came up in our group, and I'm interested to maybe hear from Richard and Daria about, is when we were looking at the middle section, the neutral, the danger of slipping back one instead of slipping forward one, and how in neutral in particular that's a danger zone. Do you have any thoughts on that when you were constructing the spectrum? How do we ensure that it's forward movement and not backwards movement?
Sorry, I was busy writing a comment there. Because the point about the passive opponents was a really interesting one. Like, how do you spot them? Sometimes it is really difficult, but you might look for clues elsewhere with similar kinds of situations. Yeah, and how do you prevent people going in the opposite direction to what you want? because it's entirely possible, unfortunately. I think that an activity like this is really useful for helping work out what messaging would work for them, and possibly what messaging would really antagonize them as well. So if there are parents who think that learning about Wikipedia is a waste of time, you need to directly address those concerns. If you're talking about something which just doesn't connect to how people are spending time, then because you're not addressing their concerns, they could end up slipping backwards on the spectrum because you're talking at different purposes. So an exercise like this is really useful for thinking about what those groups are and what their priorities might be. I think with tools like this, it's very much meant to prompt, and next steps will follow. So you might work out that we know something about this group, but we probably need to do some research into who they are, what their priorities are, and see if they are on the spectrum where we think they will be, so that you can tailor your messaging to not antagonize them. And you may find out that there will be some messages which are very important to you and you absolutely must share, and that sometimes it's just going to land with people who it will antagonize, and that there's nothing you can do about it. So it will help with strategizing with that and working out what your priorities are with those groups and with those messages.
Yeah, that's really interesting. In the group, we got a great comment from Itoro who says, since I already have the support of the active group, I would engage more with the passive group to get their buy-in. Most opposition arises from ignorance. Very true. I would engage the media to amplify my advocacy and also elaborate more on the need for the change to the passive opponents. I think that's really important. I found myself in this session with the spectrum thinking a lot about democracy and how we approach campaigning around elections, and the fact that the neutral in the center of the spectrum is maybe overlooked in favor of the extremes on either end of opposition and allyship. So I'm very certainly something I will take away from this that I think has come up in the chat as well, is neutral and passive are interesting places to put pressure and to put energy into, rather than focusing on trying to win the big battles on either side.
And I think it's a really important point about people who are neutral. They may be essentially apathetic. They may not know what the cause is. And it is possible that on learning about the cause, even if you frame your message in a way you're really happy with and you think is very well structured and clear, it may lead them to slip backwards on the spectrum for all sorts of reasons. They may more closely align with other groups already in that area. That is a risk, which is why researching these groups before connecting with them can be very useful. As people learn more about a topic, they will shape their views on it. Hopefully, they will be largely positive.
Excellent. So we're moving in now to the last section of our clinic today, for which I will stop my screen share and pass back to Richard and Daria. This part of the session will run just until 5 minutes to the hour, and then we'll do a short closing with you all, so we can thank our speakers then. So I will pass to Richard for our group reflection activity.
Thank you very much. So you've had a chance to experience 2 of the tools within the Changemaker Toolkit. I hope you found that useful. It's very much a taste of what's contained within there. And I'm sure that you'd have a different experience if you were working with different situations to help you think about what approaches you might take, or different groups as well. You get a different group of people in the room and there will be different ideas bouncing about. It can be a really helpful thing to do. So now we're moving on to the reflections about this. So at Wikimedia UK, having developed this tool, we are very keen to learn about how people are thinking about it. We've developed this because we want to help the Wikimedia movement improve at bringing about change. There's a lot of enthusiasm out there, and we hope that these approaches will help structure that and provide some tools which may be useful. If I might use a metaphor, we're providing some tools we think might be useful for you. It's up to you what you build with those tools. And you might say that actually, I don't need this particular tool, but that one also in the toolkit is really helpful. So now we're looking for some feedback on what kind of use you might get out of this toolkit. It might be specifically about these two examples, but generally, what would you find useful? How might you apply this? And what kind of advocacy and campaigning are you already involved in? That would be really useful for us to understand. So now it's opening the floor for that discussion.
I can switch to the retro board view if you'd like, Richard. I think the questions
yes,
are
please.
the same. Yeah, cool. I'll do that. Okay. I was about to jinx it and say the screen sharing's gone really well today. I didn't say it though. So how might you use the toolkit in your community, and what kind of advocacy campaigning is your community involved in? And as ever, we'd love if people would come off mic or maybe share in the Zoom chat as well, if that's something you're comfortable with. Cassie.
I also want to ask our participants, everyone here, if you feel like there's something you would add to the toolkit that you feel like would be useful to your community if you were to bring this toolkit into your cultural context. So if there's a missing question or a space that you think like you would want to add more to it so your community would understand it, I'm also interested to hear that as well so that you could adapt it to your community. Because I know Daria and Richard has said that this is also adaptable to your community context, cultural context in some way.
Great question. So someone's answered on the retro board. In my community, we will always employ the strategies of the toolkit in planning and execution to easily achieve our project goals. I think that's someone who's definitely going to be using the toolkit in future.
We also,
I'm thinking, oh, sorry, go ahead, Cassie.
I was saying Ahmad in the chat said something, and I'm going to read it out loud. They said, "Thank you for all the session. The spectrum of allies helps me to prioritize where, to whom should I put my energy to, avoid or actively engage and support in any projects or activity."
I agree, Ahmad. I think that's the one that I'm really, I mean, I'm definitely going to go off and play with the full toolkit, both in my capacity at Wikimedia UK and Let's Connect. But that spectrum is just such a good visualization of that. Oh, we've had an answer in the retro board. What kind of advocacy is your community involved in? Wikidata Wiki Project India. This is an annual Wikidata item creation campaign. That's an interesting space for change. How might you use the toolkit within that, I wonder?
that is
Cassie, go
a
ahead.
really interesting example. Sorry, go ahead, Cassie.
No, sorry, Richard. We went at the same time there.
I was gonna say, if I'm bringing this to my community and my group of friends, I was telling Richard in our main room, and the first activity was that a group of friends and I want to campaign to get rid of the parking meters that surrounds the lake that I live by, because it's an anti-commons when you're charging people to have access to parks, or natural landscapes to be part of nature. And so the thing I like most about Wikimedia Spaces is that we're not fighting an algorithm. And so if I'm bringing a Changemaker Toolkit to my community and my group of friends to use and to broadcast to people across Oakland, which is where I live, we wouldn't be fighting the TikTok or Instagram algorithm that would hide it. And even if even us broadcasting the Changemaker Toolkit on our social media platforms, it would be nice to know that when people are accessing the Changemaker Toolkit that we're using for that campaign, it wouldn't not come across people's pages, right? And so that's the
Yeah.
thing I think I would appreciate the most about Wikimedia Spaces is that we're never fighting an algorithm.
No. Yeah, that seems even more poignant at this point in time with the way social media is going, I think. I see in the retro board someone has mentioned Tarot towards a recommendation on open cultural heritage, which encourages UNESCO member states to draft and adopt a recommendation promoting open solutions to enhance access to cultural heritage in the public domain, being mindful of the various governance frameworks that govern the ways in which cultural heritage is shared and used. That is a lot of change making. That's very good. And Ahmad from Malaysia is talking about Indigenous language Wikidata project, which documented Indigenous language in Wiktionary and Wikipedia. We are also going to Japan, wow, to share and work together with Indigenous community there. That's so cool. In terms of how might you use this toolkit in your community, someone has said addressing the social grid we analysed today, having Wikidata item sets based on geographical data, educational institutions like having data of school and academic entities would be great. Cool. Anne has said in the chat, I'm working on a project that aims to increase the proportion of women on Wikipedia, with more women as contributors. I think these tools are useful for my work in this project. Yeah, that's brilliant. And Anne, we have a session on Friday about gender sensitivity that you might be interested in as well. There may be common ground there.
I think the Tara example it's a mouthful, but I think it's a cool example, kind of. It's an external project at kind of around UNESCO, and it's like a set of recommendations. I like our movement activity around it because I might be misrepresenting here a little bit, but I think like the foundation is trying to build support around this recommendation. So it's promoting it to other affiliates and recommending for them to, I think, support the recommendations or join the campaign. So the role, my point is like the specific role in change making can be actually doing the thing or doing the campaign, supporting the recommendations, or actually sort of movement building. And there's this like quite a nice word for it, convening others and like bringing them into doing the support and signing of recommendations themselves. So yeah, that's a nice example.
Yeah.
And kind of on that note, I wanted to throw an idea here. One way of engaging with the toolkit is to use the tools yourself or like in your organization for a project that you're working on. And I love that people are seeing some applications already. Another would be to also think who else in your group or community or organization would find it useful. So one idea I would want to leave people with is to see where who could you send it to as a resource to like think about where could you promote it. It's for you all to use, but it's also for you to think about where else would you pass it on, like who might be interested in looking at the toolkit on Wiki, on Meta.
I think the sharing of the toolkit is so important, and finding spaces where it would be beneficial for people and passing it on is such an act of commons and community in and of itself. I'm going to leave the floor open for a few minutes if there's anyone who wants to add anything or ask anything of our sharers. Is the other thing we have Richard and Daria here. If you have any queries about the toolkit or things you'd like to learn more about. Oh, and Dee's shared a link to Tara in the chat, which is excellent. This is the moment where I'm like, I should have had a question prepared. What was the biggest challenge of putting the toolkit together? Where was the spectrum of difficulty? What was the challenge that you faced?
Well, I'd be tempted to pass that question to Daria, but because the biggest challenge for me was thinking about how the Wikimedia related examples. So it was, it was a good opportunity to learn more about the movements, and seeing how these kind of approaches were similar, because it was about finding examples which are, I mean, they didn't set out to use these approaches in the first place. It's not an exact mapping, but we're looking for characteristics where it can be applied. So it was quite an interesting challenge with that.
I think it's interestingly, Wikimedia UK and Sheila McKechnie Foundation are both very similar sized UK charities working in, you could say we both operate within activism. But the cultures were quite different. And so it was kind of a learning curve for both organizations, I guess, to understand each other better and our languages and cultures, how we approach like control over messaging, kind of polishing the information and so on. Those were different. And it was quite a, I think, at first mystifying experience for them to understand the Wikimedia movement, coming from outside.
Yeah.
There might have been some understanding of that there's Wikipedia articles and whatnot, but the whole movement was a complete unknown. And so for us to explain who the default audience would be for this toolkit, a bit like in the spectrum of allies, we did need to focus a lot on explaining the audience first so they understand what sort of change making actually happens within the movement and who are our activists and how that relates to creating articles. We did have a bit of time speaking to them about Wikipedia and the movement, and we had like a user testing sessions to kind of explain. Otherwise, it was confusing to them. And also, as Richard touched on in the intro, so we were close but different. So some of the language, maybe we would use same words but mean different things. And one of the first things we stumbled across was this campaigning concept, where in like a UK or in that sort of charity, campaigning is like an activist, like perhaps even a political act. In Wikimedia movement, depends who you ask. Campaign can mean like an editing campaign, you know, like something where we rally people together around a topic, but it's not to like step outside with placards and demand change. It's different. So there was some work kind of reflecting on the terms we were using and trying to clarify so it's not confusing what we're trying to offer here and what is it for.
Yeah. We had 2 more comments in the chat. 1 question, 1 comment. Justice, our own Justice from Let's Connect, says he will definitely be using the toolkit in community activities, and he loves that it helps to use it collaboratively. It's always a pleasure to collaborate with Justice, I have to say. And Ahmad has asked, would you share with us how you are using this toolkit in the UK community?
That's a very good question. So far I found it quite useful when setting up projects and thinking about how we might connect with different groups, who those should be, and where we direct our time. And that's quite useful as well, even not just at the start, but during a project, say a collaboration with another organization. Think about what we want to get out of the collaboration, what change we want to bring about, and make sure that we're working with the right groups to do that. I've not yet done that as a collaborative exercise with a partner organization. I think that could be a really interesting thing to do. So far, when I've been using the tools, it's just been me sat on my own, thinking about, okay, where does this group fit on the spectrum of allies, for example. But I think that as a planning exercise, that could be really useful as a way of shaping our thinking with particular projects.
I had a colleague, kind of external colleague, who shared with me that she used one of the tools we haven't discussed here in the analyzing the problem. It's called the problem tree. Problem tree, which is she's working on this sort of education change-making project about approaches to decolonization in UK museums, and she was using this tool to deeper analyze the root kind of base causes of the issue that she's trying to address. So she can really think about kind of where to focus her attention, like what is the real source of the issue at hand, and so where can the impactful change happen. So that's also a cool tool for reflection I would recommend for people. And you go like deeper and deeper, like, okay, there is this issue because of history, but and then maybe some structures of power, and then you go like deep to really understand kind of how it comes about, the issue.
I love that. That's really cool. There's just so much to this, and I'm really pleased to have got even just a glimpse of behind the scenes of the process with you all. I'm going to pass to Bacola now to close out the session, and thank our speakers and whatnot. But yeah, thank you so much for that. And I'll pass over to Bacola.